Okay, guys, look, I get it, okay? Distorted fish trope, right? It was really cool when it was first introduced to analog horror, like whenever the first series did it, you know? It really caught me off guard. I was really scared by it. Seeing this uncanny, freaky-looking fish warped into something nearly unrecognizable, yeah, it was scary, but like, once you've seen it for the 100th time, it kind of loses its luster, you know? People gotta experiment, they gotta try something new. I'm sick of distorted fish trope. Genuinely sick of it at this point. I really, really wish that people were more innovative instead of just constantly falling back on that stupid, distorted fish.
I love analog horror.
All of the best internet horror comes from this genre. We've got the Wretched, the Other Wretched, the Third Wretched, the Fourth Wretched, hell, horror titans like Local 58, No Through Road, Marble Hornets, and Gemini Home Entertainment fall under the analog horror umbrella. Then you have every single other analog horror series, or short, that, for the most part, is completely unremarkable, uninspired, and lazy. A few of these analog horror pieces, however, are actually incredibly artistic and original, a unique gem in a sea of coal. The majority of analog horror flies completely under the radar, just because of how much of it is, well, lazy. Because of the stigma attached to so many of these projects, people aren't willing to give some genuinely talented storytellers a chance. And I admit that I am also partially at fault. See, I lied to you in the very first sentence of this video. I don't love analog horror. In fact, I hardly even like it. I don't really care for most of the big names. Even though I recognize the talent within these projects, I just don't think that analog horror is for me. I get bored, I hardly ever feel afraid, and so much of it is predictable in the worst possible way. So whenever I see a new analog horror series going around that the internet continuously gasses up, I hardly bat an eye. However, the subject of today's video is a web series that classifies as analog horror that I can undoubtedly say is my absolute favorite of the genre, which isn't much coming from someone who doesn't care for analog horror, but just hear me out, alright? I find it absolutely criminal how underrated this series is. Never before have I ever resonated with a piece of analog horror nearly as much as I have this series. I don't even know if I've ever resonated with any kind of web series this much. I genuinely believe it to be on the levels of, say, Kane Pixels, and I know that's probably a hot take, considering how highly regarded Kane is in this sphere, but I will stand my ground if anyone dares to fight me on this. As someone who is exceedingly hard to scare and abundantly skeptical when it comes to analog horror, there were so many moments when this series genuinely had my heart racing, and there are only 4 installments in it, the series not even reaching the hour-long mark. Every installment found a new way to surprise me, and set new standards for the analog horror genre. I am more than pleased today to introduce you into the world of East Ridge County, a world where eldritch demons lurk in the corners, where Halloween is a yearly tragedy, and where horrors await you at every turn. Welcome to the masterfully crafted, petrifying story of the criminally underrated dreams of an insomniac. If you're already familiar with the series, you're likely familiar with it primarily because of one reason. This thing. Yes, before dissecting this series, I need to address the elephant, or rather elephants, in the room. Dreams of an Insomniac was created by Zachary Gignac, more commonly known as Pastra or Pastra Spec. They are an artist and YouTuber whose distinct and impressive art style tends to lead people towards their videos, seeing as his thumbnails are nothing short of phenomenal. Because of Pastra's presence in the indie horror scene, a majority of people who have watched and enjoy Dreams of an Insomniac are people who were already fans of Pastra, their work, and their characters. And to me, I feel like this often hinders a lot of attention this project should rightfully be accumulating, either because people don't want to watch a YouTuber's series, because they're usually not all that great, or because Pastra fans are fucking insane, and don't really enjoy the series for what it is. Dreams of an Insomniac is an incredible work of independent art, and I honestly don't think it should be defined as Pastra's analog horror series, or the Pastra analog horror. I know that isn't necessarily important, but I just wanted to state that opinion of mine. The other elephant in the room is that I am kind of biased, if that wasn't obvious already. Evidently, I am likely more inclined to relish this series because of my own opinions on the people involved, especially Pastra himself. And I completely understand that. It is a valid criticism to have, which is why I highly encourage you to check out the series on your own time, before coming back and watching the rest of this video, and form your own opinions to see if they're at all similar to mine. That out of the way, Dreams of an Insomniac is an ongoing analog horror series created by Zachary Gignac, or Pastra, and first aired on Halloween of 2022. The series has 2 major volumes and 2 other short episodes, and follows a decently easy to follow storyline surrounding the townspeople of East Ridge County in the late 1980s, and their encounters with a fictional race known as the Veldigans. The series is from the perspective of Tommy Merrick, who stumbles upon some old tapes when visiting his old family home, and is convinced that they are haunted. These tapes are the videos that we are viewing. I want this video to primarily focus on the contents of the most recent release in the series, this being Volume 1. However, I would still like to recap the events of the other 3 installments, as well as provide some insight and give reasons as to why Dreams of an Insomniac works so well. Volume 0 of Dreams of an Insomniac, which I will henceforth be abbreviating to DOAI, is titled Haunted Halloween PSA. This volume primarily focuses on the identity of a mysterious and familiar face showing up in the town of East Ridge County. Volume 0 begins with a black static screen, displaying yellow text that explains the basic premise. Your name is Tommy Merrick. While visiting your old family home, you stumble across a strange box of tapes in the attic. Out of curiosity, you decided to watch them on your old CRT. You think they might be haunted. While watching the tapes, you begin to see and hear things that weren't meant to be there. For some reason, they felt oddly familiar to you. Dreams of an Insomniac, Volume 0. Haunted Halloween PSA. This intro to me is already striking. This is something I have never seen in an analog horror series before. Not only is DOAI directly placing the viewer into the story, utilizing second-person storytelling, but it also directly tells rather than showing right off the bat. This would probably turn a lot of people off to the series, as a lot of people seem to really despise the idea of any media in this genre being even slightly coherent. However, I think this is an incredibly effective intro, immediately telling us what we're doing here and what we're watching. The tape begins with an excerpt from a newspaper detailing a mysterious robbery that has had the town in disbelief. The newspaper excerpt reads as follows. Residents of East Ridge County have been left baffled after what is now being considered the most bizarre break-in the community has ever heard of. It supposedly happened in the early hours of the morning, with the culprit of the crime breaking into the Grimzo's retail store through the doorway. After the break-in, the culprit left the store in a wreck, having only left with a single costume that was stolen from a $5 display rack. Police are still looking for the perpetrator. However, a lack of witness accounts as well as security footage have led to the case becoming a difficult case to solve. We are shown a few shots of the exterior of Grimzo's, a retail store specializing in decorations, makeup, accessories, and props. While likely not being lore relevant, the name and mascot of the store is a cute reference to those familiar with Zach's YouTube content, as the character of Grimzo was a scrapped mascot of Pastra's, seen in this video. We see a few interviews, the first of which being with a man named Rick Graham, the store owner. He explains that no security footage could be recovered. However, this isn't entirely true, as we'll see later in the volume. Another interview is shown with a character known as Sean Grimm, who explains that he thinks the news is likely faked or staged in order to save a dying news outlet, as nothing interesting seems to ever happen in Eastridge. Eastridge being an uneventful town is an interesting detail. This likely wasn't the intended effect, and it also probably is just a me thing, but this settled fact is genuinely horrifying to me. The thought that the awful events we're going to be witnessing in this volume could happen in such a seemingly remote, insignificant area of Canada of all places is terrifying. It's just a miserable reminder that no matter where you live, you aren't safe, and I really don't like that. The costume that was stolen is shown to us, this costume being dubbed the Spooky Inmate. This costume is an orange onesie with a yellow zipper, an incredibly important and recognizable outfit. Text appears reading, "Do not trust anyone you see wearing this costume," a phrase that we will be hearing a lot of. We then cut to a broadcast discussing 6 children who mysteriously vanished on Halloween night of 1986, between 6 to 7 p.m. 6 children going missing in the same small remote area in a single hour. Another interview is shown, this being with a particularly important character, although we do not know that yet. Alex Williams. Played by Gignac himself, Alex retells the events that he witnessed that night. He explains seeing a mother run around the corner crying, asking if anyone knows where her child is. He then recalls another mother soon appearing, asking the very same thing, and then more parents frantically coming forward, begging to know where their children are. Alex describes the experience as being nothing short of chaotic. Police showing up rapidly, the townspeople panicking, and parents weeping for their lost children. We learn the names and faces of the 6 victims, these being Jason McDonald, John Thompson, Ashley Wright, William Lewis, Norman Harris, and Sam Wilson. A police sketch of the perpetrator from the description of an eyewitness is shown. A tall figure in an orange onesie, wearing a distorted black mask with a sickening smile. It is described as having a long tail and bright yellow eyes, and it's emphasized that under any circumstance, you should not approach this mysterious person. As of now, the police and the residents all seem to be under the impression that this perpetrator is a human who stole a creepy costume and is now terrorizing the town. However, us viewers probably already know differently. We are then introduced to Officer Kruger, an officer on site following the incident, and an important character to DOAI.
It breaks my heart to hear the horrible tragedy which has come over our town tonight. I promise, not only as an officer on duty, but as a father myself, that these children will be found, and the culprit behind these horrible kidnappings will be brought to justice.
One of my favorite aspects of DOAI is its usage of easy-to-miss, horrifying Easter eggs hidden within itself. This scene includes one of the best examples of this. See, as Officer Kruger's image fades away on the screen, we see a very vague, disturbing image behind him. It's incredibly hard to make out, but pausing on it gives enough of a blood-chilling image to terrify the audience, while still being difficult to make out. DOAI has a large amount of these smaller Easter eggs, especially in Volume 1. However, this is the only one I will be pointing out, because I encourage you to go watch these videos for yourself and hunt for secrets and Easter eggs. Pausing on each frame and thinking outside of the box is one of the funnest and scariest parts of horror utilizing this format, and I couldn't recommend experiencing it for yourself enough. I also encourage you to take to the comments of this video with your findings, as I'm sure that there are secrets that I myself haven't been able to locate just yet, with how recent the release of Volume 1 is. The text is read on screen. Stay indoors, lock your doors and windows. Do not trust anyone wearing this costume, before presenting the image of the police sketch yet again. We then cut to an East Ridge County Police, or ECPD, training tape from the year 1989. Yellow text appears on the screen, reading, "On the night of October 6th, 1986, these photos were taken by a security camera located in the Grimzo's retail store at exactly 6 a.m. The number 6 is predominantly featured throughout Dreams of an Insomniac, especially in quantities of 3. I don't have to tell you what this means, I'm sure, as the number 666 appears in a large quantity of internet horror. This number is associated with the number of the beast, and is often used as a symbol to represent the Antichrist, or the devil. Whether this implies that this creature is literally the devil, or just a scary demon creature, is unknown, but it is more likely the latter. The security camera photos are shown in the police training tape. Earlier, we were told that no footage from this incident survived. However, we know this isn't the case, as we are seeing photos from the security camera now. Perhaps the store owner wasn't aware, or was lying, or maybe just meant that there were no video footage of the incident. Or perhaps it's a cover-up, and the police were hiding this information from the public. Text reads as follows. Lights appear to turn on by themselves. No other disturbances are apparent. As the description says, there isn't really anything abnormal about this photo, aside from the fact that at this time the lights are not supposed to be on. 6 minutes later, we see that items were thrown around and damaged. The text reads, motion was detected within the store. Items appear to be thrown around and damaged. The next image we see is probably the most iconic and thug-ass gangster shot in this entire volume. We see a close-up of the perpetrator's face with text below reading "first contact," a phrase usually used to describe first contact with an alien species. The image depicts 2 slanted eyes with tiny slits for pupils, along with a contorted, horrifying smile. There is a reason why this character design is so popular and well-liked. The recognizability and the color palette works incredibly well in its favor, and while their more cartoony version isn't necessarily horrifying, this depiction of them absolutely is. The bright yellow against pure black burns into the back of your skull, so that when you close your eyes, he is still there, watching. The sick, devilish grin peering out of the darkness, teeth yellow and contorted. DOAI's character design is absolutely incredible, and as much as I would love to gush on about it, I'll designate a portion of this video after the overall summary just to that. More text is shown on screen. These photos, as well as a description from an eyewitness, were the only 2 pieces of information we had regarding the anomalous entity known as the East Ridge Demon, until today. It seems that the police have ceased denying the probability of this criminal being inhuman, as the text explains that this entity is known as the East Ridge Demon. I will mention here, as I've neglected to mention it previously, but the name of the East Ridge Demon outside of canon is Clyde. Whether this is canon to DOAI, I'm not entirely sure, but it is easiest to refer to this character as Clyde, as that is, well, his name. We then cut to Officer Kruger again. Text reads, after multiple years of extensive mental and physical therapy, Officer Kruger, a surviving victim of the demon, was finally able to inform detectives of the events that transpired on the night he came face to face with this dangerous creature. With the information he provided, we now have a better understanding of this threat and how our personnel can combat it. The creature appears to be capable of causing hallucinations to those close by. Precautions. All personnel must operate alongside a fellow officer. Take note of your surroundings. Do not trust anyone you see if you believe yourself to be hallucinating. Physical contact with the demon is incredibly dangerous. Following his encounter with the creature, Officer Kruger had developed severe physical abnormalities, which are still being treated to this day. The next segment is easily the most disturbing segment in this entire volume. We see an image of Officer Kruger before his encounter with the East Ridge Demon, next to one right after. Although his face is largely censored, we can tell just how disfigured this man has become. His discolored skin clings to his bones. We are told that significant abnormalities of an encounter with this creature include discolored skin, severe weight loss, tightening of skin, the fusing of bone and flesh, teeth growing where they shouldn't, and bleeding from every orifice. The clip that cuts into this tape is so unbelievably astonishing and frightening that I couldn't describe it with words. I will play the clip, but not before giving a warning. This clip features some loud noises and images of body horror, specifically of the symptoms I mentioned. The clip is less than 20 seconds, so go ahead and just skip by that much if you really don't want to see this.
The most significant of these abnormalities include discoloration of the
After this, the footage returns to normalcy. Precautions. Keep distance between yourself and the demon. Only approach if absolutely necessary. Seek immediate help in the event of contact. The East Ridge demon is extremely intelligent and is aware it is being hunted. What to look out for. The demon will attempt to take advantage of you when you are most vulnerable. Do not be fooled by the demon's hallucinations. Do not let the demon make physical contact. Do not make any attempt to communicate with the demon. It will steal your voice. Above all else, do not trust anyone wearing this costume. We see a wanted poster depicting the police sketch from earlier, accompanied by a completely new and even more petrifying sketch. I can't quite make out the text here because I am stupid. Next is an image of the East Ridge Demon, a new nickname for it being revealed to us in the text. Beware, the Smiling Snatcher. I would like to take a moment to truly appreciate the effectiveness of this segment. While this section utilizes many common tropes found in the analog horror genre, this is a way of executing it that made my blood actually turn cold. The images are of course horrifying, especially the teeth one. Ugh, I hate teeth. But what really makes this section stand out to me is its sound design. See, Dreams of an Insomniac has a completely original soundtrack composed by Lyra Horrors. None of that distorted 70s music bullcrap. All of the tracks we hear in this volume and in volume 1 are entirely original, and add to the experience immensely. And if you think the soundtrack for volume 0 is fire, you have no idea what you're getting into with volume 1. I'll leave a section of this video that is completely dedicated to the music of DOAI, and analyze why it adds so much to the series. But right now, I would just like to analyze the sound design and music in this specific scene. The repeated blaring drone sounding, accompanied with the agonizing creaking screams, is nothing short of phenomenal. The breathing slowly picking up terrified me on my first viewing. The constant repeating sounds evoke a sense of panic and terror. The fact that this series even has its own entirely original soundtrack is incredibly beautiful, and isn't something I think I've seen in any other popular analog horror series. If you know one that does do this, I'd love to know about it in the comments, but as far as I know, DOAI is the only series to utilize music and sound design to this extent, and it works incredibly in its favor. The next segment of this volume takes place 4 years later, in 1993, this being the namesake of the volume, the Haunted Halloween PSA. We are shown footage of movies playing on a TV screen before being interrupted by an emergency alert system. This PSA is titled The Rules of the Season, illustrated by someone named Mortimer Gray, and presented by the Lankman Foundation. For those already somewhat familiar with Gignac's work, Lankman is a character that has been present on their channel multiple times, being the main antagonist of an ARG or alternate reality game that was created and hosted on the channel. He's very similar to, say, a Batman antagonist, and takes most inspiration from them and also the likes of Spamton from Deltarune. He has a lot of his own lore outside of DOAI. However, Zach has stated that anything relating to these characters outside of DOAI shouldn't be considered canon unless it is present in DOAI itself. And something tells me that the ARG where Lankman takes over the Pastra YouTube channel and is jealous of the Smiling Snatcher isn't canon to Dreams of an Insomniac, so it's kind of unimportant to the topic of today's video. Another new name we see here is the name Mortimer Gray. This is not the only time this character will be mentioned, however very little information is available about them. I have a feeling that because this name has been mentioned more than once, it must be important later on, and we'll get there, trust me. From the moment the emergency alert system ends right to the very end, we can see the face of the Smiling Snatcher burnt into the screen. The same yellow eyes as before are prominent. I really like this detail, as it's somewhat subtle but still easy to catch up on, and further establishes why this particular image and character design is so effective. The bright yellow eyes are so easy to burn into your eyes. Here, just look at this image for like 10 seconds, and then close your eyes. It's awesome. So, to see it used here is just another reminder that the East Ridge Demon is always watching. It also may be implying that it's watching this very PSA, and is learning alongside with it, learning how people are trying to combat it, so it can tear down their every defense. While this is just theoretical, it's an incredibly eerie and incredibly possible aspect, one that is backed up by the line back in the policeman training tape that claims that the demon knows it is being hunted.
As Halloween night begins to set in, all residents of East Ridge County should be reminded that the Smiling Snatcher is out tonight. This monster is very real and threatens the safety of all Eastridge County residents. But don't worry, so long as these 5 simple rules are followed, you have nothing to worry about. Rule number 1. Remember the curfew. No trick-or-treaters should be outside past 6 o'clock p.m. That is when the Smiling Snatcher comes out to play. Rule number 2. Keep all doors and windows in your house locked. That way the Smiling Snatcher cannot come inside. Rule number 3. You do not hear the knocking at your doors or windows. Rule number 4. You do not hear the knocking at your doors. Rule number 4. If you see or hear someone you know outside past curfew, that is not them. That is the Smiling Snatcher wearing their skin.
This line is compelling to me, as it can be taken literally or figuratively to describe this creature mimicking someone else's voice or general opinions. Still, the idea of the Smiling Snatcher quite literally wearing someone else's skin is horrifying. The rest of this PSA is so striking, I don't think words could do it justice. As such, I will play it for you.
Rule of all. Rule number 5. Do not trust anyone you see wearing this costume.
In classic analog horror fashion, the footage gets more and more distorted, with images flashing behind the smiling demon frantically. These are all images we've seen before. Images of the 6 victims, images presented in the PSAs and training tapes, the police sketches, and so on. A noticeable detail here is that the image of Officer Kruger after the attack is actually presented completely uncensored, and it is horrifying. Other than the body horror section, this is a massive highlight for this volume. Especially the music. Clyde's face's distorting is astonishingly subtle and compelling, and the music, by god, the music. It's absolutely breathtaking. The panicked, frenzied tone speeding up and repeating makes it work so damn well. Every single soundtrack for this series is so beautiful. I have to hold myself back from talking about it right now for the sake of this video actually being somewhat structured. This footage continues to go on, an image of Clyde burning into frame, before presumably Tommy shuts off the tape. This leads into the credits. All of the people involved with this volume, and the other ones, should be very proud of their hard work and effort. I can tell how much it meant to these people that this project was able to come to life, and how much effort they've put in and continue to put into the series. After the credits play, a to-be-continued screen is shown, showcasing the likeness of Lankman. This first volume was fucking fantastic. I've already sung its praises long enough, but I just need to sing them for a little bit longer before we move on. The overall premise is simple, but the execution makes it what it truly is. A masterpiece, a work of art. I really, really hope the release of Volume 1 has brought many more eyes onto this series, and if not, then I hope that this video can serve as an opportunity for people to discover the pure, raw talent behind Dreams of an Insomniac. I'm writing this segment of the script before the release of Volume 1, so I have no idea if it's immensely popular and the series has taken off and there's a GT Live video about it already. But please, if you're watching this video, if you have any friends who are big fans of horror or just appreciate good good art, I want to get the word out to as many people as possible. Watch Dreams of an Insomniac. I can understand why this first volume may have flown under the radar a bit. At first glance, it does look kind of like the basic lazy analog horror, image and text on a black background slop that we get a million times a year. But giving it a chance is absolutely worth your time, and if you still don't enjoy it, I beg you to watch Volume 1. It is somehow a massive step up from the original volume, and I would appreciate it so much if you could go watch that before finishing the rest of this video. As of now, DOAI has only 2 major installments. However, there are 2 more short videos serving somewhat as epilogues, or in-betweens. The first of these 2 videos was posted on December 16th, 2022, being titled In Loving Memory. The description reads as follows. After viewing the first tape you found in the attic, you found yourself too afraid to put another in your VCR. Trying to forget about what you saw, you went to bed that night to try and get some much-needed rest. But those things you witnessed, those things you heard, they kept you up. The curiosity began to eat away at you. So you went back to your CRT late into the night, and despite your fear, you put in another tape. In Loving Memory opens on an image of Officer Kruger before cutting to Sean, one of the interviewees from the first volume, the one who had doubts about the legitimacy of the robbery. He reiterates his statement from the previous video, saying how he doesn't believe any of this. However, this time around, he gets cut off by the interviewer, saying that it isn't believable and that they'll just use another take. This implies that these interviews weren't entirely real. Perhaps some of them were and others weren't, but this one does appear to be entirely fake. We then fade in again to an image of Officer Kruger, who we learn the full name of, Kenneth Kruger. Text below reads, In Loving Memory of Kenneth Kruger, 1956 to 1987. It seems that our dear friend Kruger from earlier has since passed away. A voiceover plays explaining this unfortunate passing of Officer Kruger. The video explains that Kruger's passing occurred late into Halloween night, a year after the original incident. Officers discovered his body after receiving reports that his son, Klaus, was heard screaming inside his home. His body was found hanging inside of his son's closet, along with a note. This note is incredibly grainy and difficult to read. It starts with, "To my dearest son," and speaks on his regrets and guilt throughout life, seeming almost like a suicide note. Kruger was very close to many families who were involved in the missing children's incident, which led him to have many feelings of regret and guilt. No one was there to listen to him in his time of need. There's then a section that provides for a number to help if anyone is suffering from these thoughts or ideations. However, it soon turns into a message that reads, "You are alone. This place is your tomb." We then see glaring red eyes turn to the camera. These are likely Lankman's, as they are incredibly similar to his red circular eyes, and as we see these eyes more later, they seem to be the same. Keep these glowing red eyes in mind. It cuts to an image of Kruger after his contact with the Smiling Snatcher. In the original memorial video, Kruger was stated to have passed away in 1987. This time around, however, text reads that Kruger passed away in 1996, around a decade after he was said to have died in his memorial. Kruger had also appeared in police training videos in 1989, meaning that Kruger was absolutely alive all of this time. However, this was kept hidden from the general public. In this scene, he's begging for help, saying he just wants to die, begging to die. He asks an unseen figure, "Why won't you let me die?" To which an ominous voice responds with this,
"Because I still have use for you yet."
We hear footsteps before a door slams, and the credits roll. This character is referred to as the Doctor, as seen in the credits. This is important and will start making a lot more sense later on. One of my favorite factors of DOAI is how puzzle pieces slowly start to fit together and click in the viewer's brain. I felt incredibly intelligent whenever I was able to connect one thing or another to another event. And it only adds to the reasons why I love this series so much. The next video is titled Family Photo Album. This video begins with a logo of Lankman and text reading, "The viewing of this tape is meant only for the eyes of authorized Foundation personnel. Unsolicited viewings may lead to termination." This tape likely belongs to the Lankman Foundation, seeing as this is, well, a logo depicting Lankman. On the night of January 6, 1987, the ECPD had received a phone call from a distressed distressed man reporting that something was trying to break into his home. Upon the dispatcher's arrival, he, as well as anyone else who may have been living in the house, were reported missing. Only evidence that could be found at the scene of the crime were a photo album, as well as a camcorder which seemingly contained footage of the events which transpired on that very night. We see a photo from the album titled Family Photo. Text reading, upon opening the photo album, detectives were baffled to find that all of the photos within were horribly distorted. This made it incredibly difficult to identify the people depicted. We then cut to footage labeled as search number 6. Taking place on January 6th, 1987. This is the camcorder footage that was recovered from that night. It begins with someone walking through what appears to be a snowy neighborhood at night. The live action footage of this segment is really, really good. Nothing is super outstanding about the cinematography, but I find it just so endearing how the orange coloring works so well in the series' favor. The county really does feel like Halloween, and as a Halloween and 80s horror lover, I absolutely adore it. We then cut to another photo, this one being titled First Night Out. Text reads, when the detectives questioned neighboring residents about the identity of the family in the photos, none were able to provide any useful information. One resident went as far as to say that no family has ever lived in that house. It was like they never existed. It then cuts to more camcorder footage, where we hear a voice whisper,
Sammy?
The person responds with something along the lines of, Sammy? Sammy, is that you? The daddy sounds again, and the person says, I'm right here, Sammy. You're gonna have to help me out, honey. I can't find you. A bright yellowish-orange starts to glow from behind, turning the footage into a bright yellow. We see the face of the smiling snatcher, before swiftly cutting into an image from the photo album titled Goodbye. Text below reads, while the culprit behind these disappearances remains a mystery, several photos in the album, as well as the 911 call, made that night suggest that they may not be human. The goodbye text vanishes, and we then see footage of the cameraman running and frantically breathing while panicked music plays. We then see the interior of his house, and see this person making a call to the dispatcher, claiming that this thing was a demon, and that it took him, and now it's going to take me. This is the 911 call that the beginning of this video was referring to. While begging for the police to save him, he picks up the family photo album, and is interrupted by the orange-yellow light showing once again. The music begins to play. The man asks why it's doing this to him, to which a voice responds, you have nothing left. An empty man, sitting in an empty home. But you don't have to be. They're still here, inside. They scream your name. They miss you. Come to me, and you will never be alone again. Time fasts forward, and police are outside. An officer collects the photo album, and we see one last photo, this one being titled, I Love You. Text below reads the only clear photo of the perpetrator. The credits then play, and the text to be continued in Volume 1 shows. This episode, while being much smaller, helps to build the world of Eastridge County and show the distress that these victims face. I'm willing to bet that this is the father of Sam Wilson, one of the missing children, seeing as he calls out for someone named Sammy. This video also had an introduction in the description. However, I've chosen to conceal it until now. It reads, looking through the collection of tapes once more, you find a set which seems out of place. They're kept in a separate box with the name Alex Williams crudely written on it with what looks to be a cheap black marker. Looking inside, you can see that all of the tapes within are labeled as being part of a Foundation archive. Curiosity gets the best of you once more, and you put the first tape you find into your VCR. Alex Williams is a character that we saw back in the first volume, someone who had witnessed the horrifying events of that faithful Halloween. This is the first tape of the Lankman Foundation archive. As to how Alex Williams had access to these tapes, we'll get into that in just a moment. This video was posted on March 3rd of 2023, making it over a year old. A year, and there had been practically no word on any new content. At least, until now. Dreams of an Insomniac has, although rather quietly, been in production ever since. With it being more of a collaborative work, there were many things that had to come together to make this volume possible. However, in the first week of April 2024, the pieces were finally put together, and Dreams of an Insomniac, Volume 1, Foundation Archive, has been released. Volume 1 of Dreams of an Insomniac is the entire reason why this very video exists. Never before have I been so astonished by something the way that I had been by this very video. This volume stands at 24 minutes. 10 minutes longer than Volume 0, and each and every moment is beyond worth the year-long wait. It isn't easy for me to explain what I love about this particular volume so much without spoiling literally everything right off the bat. And well, I will be going into spoiler territory. I will give you one last disclaimer. Please, I beg you to go watch this volume blindly before returning to this video. I promise it will make for an amazing 24 minutes of your life, and you will not regret your decision. If you're still here, I'm going to assume that you've already watched it, or that you are evil and need to wait for a commentary YouTuber to recap the events of something and tell you how much they love it before you check it out for yourself. And that's fine, I'm not mad, to each their own. Foundation Archive begins with a basic content warning for flashing lights, graphic depictions of violence, and loud noises and jump scares. I'll go ahead and give you this same warning here, as I will be playing a few clips that could be distressing to some viewers. The very first thing we see is green. Lots of green. A room illuminated in viridescent light, while staying dark all the same. A man starts to address the audience. If you remember, this is Alex Williams, the character played by Gignac themselves. He tells us his name and explains that he works for the Lankman Foundation. Ah, that explains where he got those tapes. But why would an employee share confidential information? Well, we're about to find out. Alex explains that his job at the Lankman Foundation became a job that he would soon come to deeply regret. This is his story. Alex explained that his work for the Foundation began almost exactly when it was founded. After the events he had witnessed on that fateful Halloween, he was put under witness protection, and was under constant surveillance. With no room to breathe, he may as well have been under house arrest. The Lankman Foundation gave him a job, proclaiming it was for his own safety. Alex explains that the Foundation was abundantly secretive, and that the only thing he was told about the work they pursued was that they aimed to help Veldigan victims. As a refresher, since Veldigans are more heavily mentioned in this volume, specifically by their name, a Veldigan is the name given to the species of the mysterious creatures haunting Eastridge. For instance, the Smiling Snatcher. I'll touch up on more information regarding this species in a later segment. For now, we cut to another tape from the Lankman Foundation, this being a PSA.
Hello! You don't know me, but I certainly know you. Allow me to introduce myself. My name is Lankman, or at least a cartoon version of the man himself, created by our lovely in-house animator, Mortimer Gray.
Here is a character known as Toon Lankman, also portrayed by Gignac himself. If this means that Alex voiced this character in canon, that would make for an amusing detail. Toon Lankman makes an introduction almost identical to Lankman's introduction in Pastra's ARG. While not holding any lore significance, it's a neat nod to people who are already familiar with other incarnations of this character. Toon Lankman explains that his likeness was conceived by the artist Mortimer Gray. This is the same name mentioned in the Haunted Halloween PSA. Mortimer Gray is mentioned to be the artist of a show known as Candy Mouse. This is an interesting detail, one that I have purposefully neglected to note until now. Mortimer is a character that we have seen depicted before outside of DOAI. If you look through some of Gignac's previous artworks, we have a reference sheet of Mortimer as well as a piece titled The Tragedy of Mortimer Gray. In both of these depictions, Mortimer looks less than human. In fact, he resembles the likeness of a cartoon, specifically one from an older era. At first glance, Mortimer definitely appears to be a Veldigan. I mean, the striped, lanky limbs, the twisted, yellowing teeth, he fits right in with the rest of the Veldigan cast. However, I believe that this is merely a result of the side effects of Veldigan contact, corruption to resemble a cartoon. The very cartoons that Mortimer spent his life drawing. There's more evidence to back this up near the climax of this volume, so let's put this on the back burner for now. Hopefully poor Mortimer doesn't burn while I explain the rest of this volume to you. Toon Lankman goes on to describe the founding of the Lankman Foundation. We learn that this PSA takes place 4 years after the first appearance of the Veldigan, likely being the Smiling Snatcher, or Clyde. We learn about the founder as well, a man by the name of Herbert Lankman. Of course his name is fucking Herbert. Herbert Lankman used his father's inheritance to renovate and reopen an asylum, solely for the purpose of treating Veldigan victims. We are also told that the Lankman Foundation frequently funds the Eastridge County Police Department. A seemingly unimportant detail, but as we've come to learn, almost all information given to us in this series is important to the overarching narrative. Lankman explains that although the past few years have been scary, soon enough this will all be a thing of the past. A telephone number is provided to call the Lankman Foundation. We then cut to a phone call made to the Eastridge County Police Department. However, before I talk about this, there's an interesting and honestly kind of amusing detail that was definitely not intended, but one that I still appreciate. See, the number used for the Lankman Foundation is 555 0100. Now, before you get any funny ideas and call this number for yourself, 555 numbers are typically used for fictional purposes, meaning nothing will happen if you try to call this number. You can go ahead and try it if you'd like, as you really wouldn't be disturbing anyone, but no, it isn't a real number. Because these numbers are typically reserved for fictional depictions, this particular number has likely been used in other media before, and looking up the number 555-0100 will lead you straight to its most popular appearance. And no, it isn't the Lankman Foundation, unfortunately. If you look up this number, there is one particular usage of it that may be familiar, depending on how good your taste in comedy is. Have a listen.
It's Smallmoo! If you want Smallmoo to be the 5th smiling friend, text Smallmoo to 555-0100. And if you don't, text NO! I really don't want Smallmoo to 555-0100.
Yes, the Lankman Foundation phone number is the same number that is used in Smiling Friends to text regarding fucking Smormoo. This was absolutely not intentional, but I'm going to believe that it is, and that this is incredibly significant to the lore. Perhaps in modern times, the Lankman Foundation has been completely dethroned and taken over by Smormoo. Maybe we don't have Veldigan in our universe because Smormoo killed them all and erased the government's brain. I'm just saying. Back on track, we cut to a phone call. Text on screen reads, on the night of April 6th, 1990. This phone call was made to the Eastridge County Police Department. This tape acts as the only archive of this call. All other records are to be purged. The first line of this call is the most horrifying part of the entire series. Please proceed with caution.
Eastridge 911, where is your emergency?
Did you catch that? That's David Barron. I know, scary, but I'll hold your hand through this phone call, and everything will be okay. We will make it through this. A frantic voice seemingly belonging to a young woman sounds on the phone, begging for help. The officer asks for her to describe the situation to him. This is her description.
This is 45 Elk Crescent. Send the police, please!
Can you describe the situation to me, ma'am?
There's a group of men trying to break into my house. They're slamming on the door. Please send the police now!
The police will be on their way in a moment, ma'am. I just need you to breathe. Did you get a good look at these men? What did they look like?
I don't know what they look like. They're all wearing masks. I can't see their faces. They look all the same!
What kind of masks, ma'am?
Yellow ones? They're wearing yellow masks. Do they look like bandages? Hello? Hello, is anybody there?
We are then shown chilling footage from the perspective of this woman. This then cuts back to Alex, who describes more of his experience working at the Foundation. He recalls there being incredibly strict rules, and instructive training tapes for practically every little thing. Alex explains that the employees of the Foundation were kept completely in the dark, and didn't really know anything other than the fact that the asylum was to supposedly care for Veldigan victims. The most cardinal regulation was that employees of the facility were strictly instructed to keep these goggles on at all times, as a preventative measure to avoid certain hallucinatory environments. Alex vocalizes that neither he nor his peers had any clue what this could possibly mean. The patients were horrified of every single employee, likely due to their admittedly horrifying attire, and would often complain about hearing unbearable, horrible music. All of the staff treated it completely normally, as if causing distress to Veldigan victims was absolutely acceptable. Alex says that he seemed to be the only person who thought this was abnormal. We're shown a training tape likely shown to the employees of the Foundation.
Here in the Lankman Asylum, it is imperative for all staff members to be aware of our state-of-the-art hallucinatory environment.
The narrator for this tape is a voice you may recognize, this being Noah or Demuted. We are shown precautions and beneficial technology given to the employees. The benefits of these technologies are described with text reading: benefits of hallucinatory technology, accessible treatment through exposure, better control over unruly patients, improved methods of concealment. Employees are instructed to never, under any circumstances, remove their goggles. Symptoms of optical hallucinations are then given to us. They read as follows: warping of the environment around you, entryways and exits appearing and disappearing, seeing people that do not exist. Remember these symptoms specifically, as they'll be important later. In fact, let's put them on the other cooker right next to Mortimer. And, of course, do not interact with the caretakers. The caretakers are described as the most disturbing part of this facility. They were dressed in black from top to bottom, and no one was ever allowed to interact with them for any reason. Other employees were told that this was because their job was just that important, but Alex had his suspicions. He explains that the caretakers are what led him to reaching his breaking point, and that they would often take patients into rooms, patients who, more often than not, seemed unwilling. In facilities like these, obviously the patients are not likely to want to be there. Of course, Veldigan contact symptoms are a little more severe than what we experience in the real world. However, there are still connections to be made. Someone suffering from severe mental or physical pain is usually in too much anguish to want to cooperate. It's not problematic for a nurse or professional to push a patient gently towards the right path for their own safety. For instance, if a patient is about to do something that will immediately hurt them, it isn't out of the question for a professional to grab them gently and restrain them from causing further harm to themselves. However, the way Alex described these caretakers in specific, it seems as if the treatment of the victims in this facility was anything but ideal. They are described to forcefully drag patients into rooms, among other things. We'll get more into the caretakers and their role in a moment, but for now I'll let Alex continue his explanation. He tells us that one night the caretakers brought in a new patient, one who didn't appear to have any noticeable symptoms, physical or psychological. None of the other employees seemed to understand it, but later that night they heard her start to scream and wail blaringly. Alex explains that she wasn't screaming for seemingly no reason, the way an insane patient would have, but instead she was screaming because 4 caretakers were dragging her out by her arms and legs while she thrashes in protest, kicking and screaming. Alex immediately tried to help her, but another coworker stopped him to tell him that it isn't worth it. Alex explains that this encounter was the one that broke him. Caretakers were treating Veldigan victims, the very victims they were supposed to help, the victims they told everyone they were helping, like worthless cattle. These caretakers did not treat these suffering victims like people. Let it be known that this particular woman had not been experiencing experiencing symptoms similar to the other patients. The only times where she seemed to be in distress were whenever the caretakers would drag her somewhere. As we'll learn in a moment, this woman is actually the very person we heard on the phone call recording. If you hadn't caught on already, the figures attempting to get into her house bear resemblance to the caretaker uniforms, bandaged faces, dressed in all black, and those goggles. So all we know about this woman is that she likely isn't a Veldigan victim, and was essentially kidnapped by the caretakers. This makes things even worse, as not only were the caretakers likely treating Veldigan victims this poorly within the facility walls, but they would also capture innocent, uninvolved people, and treat them even more horribly. This instance showcasing the caretaker's treatment of this woman caused Alex to realize his disdain for the Foundation, and as such, he began to search for answers. He would approach as many of his coworkers as possible to ask for information or answers in a plan to bring down the Lankman Foundation and bring the horrors of this asylum to light. However, none of these coworkers wanted anything to do with Alex nor his plan, advising him against it, once again telling him that it just wasn't worth it. However, Alex was persistent. He ignored his coworkers and continued to try to find any information in the name of justice. Alex made the decision to start turning towards the patients, trying to get information out of them. He figured his best bet would be with the woman who had been mistreated by the caretakers earlier. He sneaks into her room late into the night with a camcorder in order to record an interview with the woman. This is that interview.
Please don't hurt me. I promise I'll behave. I don't want to go back.
Listen, I don't want to hurt you, I promise. I'm just here to ask a few questions is all. I'm sorry about what happened to you the other night. It was horrible. I want to try and make sure that doesn't happen again. And it would help a lot if you could answer my questions.
Okay.
Alright, thank you. Okay, so my first question. Why were you brought here? You didn't have any diagnosis, and you don't seem to suffer from any symptoms of Veldigan sickness.
I don't know why I'm here. These men broke into my house. Nobody came to help me. The doctor told me I'm sick, but I don't know what he means. I'm sorry if that doesn't help.
It's okay, don't worry. That helps a lot. You're doing great. Now, my next question. That night when you were attacked here, I know it must be a lot, and I'm sorry to bring it up, but do you know where they took you?
I don't know. He told me I can't tell anybody. I'm sorry, I can't tell you that. He said he would take me back there. And I don't want to go. I don't want to go.
Hey, it's alright. It's alright. You're not going to go back there, I promise. I just need to know where it was. Nobody else will know.
They took me to room 66.
What? No, that's not possible. There's only...
It's him!
Just try.
He's going to take me back now! Please don't take him back!
He isn't going to take
Don't let him take me back! Don't let him take me back!
Wait for a moment.
Just what do you think you're doing?
Do you recognize that voice? And no, I don't mean from The Walton Files or Mimic's Day Out. I mean, do you recognize that voice from any of the previous installments of Dreams of an Insomniac? That is undeniably the voice belonging to Bravi. Her voice is recognizable from a mile away to anyone familiar with this kind of work. And who does Bravi play in DOAI? A little character known as the Doctor. And in this interview, the interviewee directly refers to the Doctor. We'll get into that in just a moment, as the highlight of this entire volume is about to take place. Either the Doctor or the caretakers dragged this woman out, and it was the last time Alex ever saw her. After that, they had only sent him back to work, as if nothing had ever occurred. Alex recalls the room 66 mentioned by the woman beforehand. He says that this shouldn't be possible, as there is no room 66. The facility was carefully designed with only 65 rooms in mind. It shouldn't have any other rooms. And here is where we take the information from the training tape off the back burner. Ah, perfectly toasted. See, one of the supposed symptoms of not wearing your protective gear, such as your goggles, is of course hallucinations. Specifically hallucinations and warping of environments, people that don't exist, and most importantly, entryways and exits appearing and disappearing. Are you starting to understand what I'm hinting at? The higher-ups of the Lankman Foundation, if it wasn't obvious already, are hiding something. Hiding something from its employees, hiding something from the public, hiding something from you. The caretakers and the doctor keep and enforce such a high sense of control over the public, and especially over their own unaware employees. They use fear-mongering to scare people working at the Foundation into always wearing protective goggles. Because if they don't wear these goggles, they'll hallucinate. They'll see things that aren't truly there. Environments and areas that don't actually exist. They are not there. Never take off your goggles, or you will hallucinate what is not there. They are not real. Room 66 is not real. At least that is what they want you to think. That is what they make you think. Something that Alex is about to find out. Alex explains that he would watch through the old conversation on the camcorder and try to find something, anything that he had missed. He explains that he spotted something in the corner of his eye. Something that he swore wasn't there before. A camera. The asylum didn't have cameras in any of the patients' rooms, so why was something picking up on the recording footage that he hadn't seen with his very own eyes? Alex explains that he would never have gone forward with the interview if he knew that they were being watched. Later he went to go check the rooms of the other patients, and yet there is still absolutely nothing. No cameras. So, late at night, Alex decides to test something. Something he is horrified to do, and something that no one has ever dared to attempt before. He takes off the goggles.
Late one night when no one else was around, I tested something. Something I was afraid to. I removed those goggles they gave us. And when I opened my eyes, everything looked the exact fucking same. Everything started to make sense after that. Who knows what they could have been hiding that we just couldn't see? Cameras, people, rooms. Suddenly, room 66 was terrifyingly possible, and I was going to find it.
With this newfound information, Alex realizes that the existence of a Room 66 is entirely plausible, and as such, he goes on a search to find this mysterious room. The build-up to this scene is incredibly executed. The slow, grainy footage of Alex wandering down the long corridors, looking around the facility, himself edited in here and there to add insight into the situation. It all blends together perfectly. Before, Alex's room was entirely green, a dim room illuminated by viridescent lights. However, in this scene, and this scene alone, his room is completely shrouded in bright, striking red. The same red that covers the entire asylum in this footage. Even the environment outside of using this filter has tinges of red and red lighting. The contrast between Alex's heavy green environments and the Lankman Foundation's heavy emphasis on red is basic color theory. I shouldn't have to explain this to you, but just in case, red and green are opposites on the color wheel. This is a very simple yet effective form of visual storytelling. Alex is morally correct in this situation, trying his hardest to help the victims and inform the people of every horror occurring in this facility, while the Lankman Foundation is morally corrupt, mistreating its patients, lying to and manipulating its employees, putting countless people in danger, and lying to the public. Good and evil, highlighted not only by color themes and environments, but also by the soundtrack as well. This is another thing we'll circle back on in a bit. The build-up to this scene is so effective that I vividly recall my heart genuinely pounding out of my chest, something that has never happened before when watching an analog horror series. I couldn't tell whether or not I should have been nerding out about how sick these shots are, or to be horrified as Alex slowly approaches door 66. The camera cuts to Alex once more before we see him slowly open the door. Darkness can be seen, breathing can be heard, and in an instant, we see red.
Help me!
It's as if Room 66 is an entirely different universe, an entrance to hell concealed within a dim facility. It's difficult to tell just what this red stuff on the floor is, and the ambiguity adds to the horror. These are human remains, and standing above them is the Veldigan themselves, the one captured by the Lankman Foundation and taken in to be studied, Winfrey. Winfrey's size is immediately made apparent, with his entire body not even being able to fit on camera. His body convulses as he breathes rapidly, his arms and legs towering over the human remains, and towering over Alex. The skin on his face is peeled back to reveal a melting, bloody, fleshy face, and a bloody handprint is sat above one of his eyes. The details of his face are hard to make out behind the VHS filter, but you can see them more clearly in the thumbnail. This design is phenomenal, especially considering the fact that Winfrey's original, more cartoon design seems difficult to translate into a more realistic setting. I especially like the fact that his mouth here seems to be a combination of these two faces seen on his reference sheet. Winfrey keeps his blue colors from this design as well, accompanied by his long arms and yellow eyes. However, the colors are much more saturated, and his build is less skinny. I really like this approach. It shows that characters don't have to follow the same tall, lanky, skinny body type in order to look threatening. Winfrey looks absolutely horrifying, especially considering his massive stature, and he is not even in motion. Imagine a horror game or movie utilizing a design like this, instead of settling for the same tall, scary monster for the 40th time. Seeing a creature with this build moving around and trying to grab you with its massive arms, barely squeezing through doorways and looming over you at all times, would be so effective. And I hope other analog horror creators, as well as horror game developers, take note of this kind of character design. The lights turn off, and Winfrey's eyes glow red in the darkness. Before we see those big, round, red eyes again, we cut back to footage of Alex, who tells us that he finally understands what everyone was so afraid of.
I was finally seeing what they were seeing. For the first time, I saw his face. We finally get a good view of the Doctor himself, Lankman. The color of his skin is desaturated, his withered flesh pulling back to reveal large and abnormal teeth, all while shriveled flesh clings to his skull. His hair is dry and minimal, sticking out like the tendrils of a disgusting, unkept paintbrush. His nose is missing, a deep skeletal hole where it should be, and his eyes. By God, his eyes. Those red eyes that have been following us all the way back in early 2023. We are experiencing this with Alex. We know what everyone is so afraid of. For the first time ever, we are seeing Lankman's face. If the description of Lankman's face feels familiar to you, congratulations, you've obtained media literacy. Lankman's appearance is identical to the symptoms described all the way back in Volume 0, the symptoms that Kruger experienced after contact with a Veldigan. Herbert Lankman, after years of testing, observing, and experimenting on Winfrey, has become akin to the exact force that the Lankman Foundation has been claiming to be against all this time. And now we can finally take Mortimer off the back burner for a moment, before we leave him there to burn while we wait for more DOAI content. I believe that Mortimer will show up in a later installment, either as a human or as his corrupted, cartoonish form. It is likely that he will develop this appearance because of Clyde, the same way Lankman developed his because of Winfrey. As of now, though, we have yet to see Mortimer physically appear. Only time will tell when we see this dashing face. This scene, in my opinion, is the highest point of Foundation arc
archive. The entirety of this video is building up to the appearance of Winfrey. We only see him for a brief moment before Lankman appears and immediately steals the show. While I do wish Winfrey had some more screen time simply because I really like him, I think this execution was wonderful. The music in the scene is also important, but I'm going to wait to talk about that in detail. When Lankman appears, we can see a few images briefly flash over him. The first and fourth of these are a wall of text giving out medical instructions. If you pay close attention and know your old medical procedures well, you'll recognize that these are the instructions for performing a lobotomy. Please do not attempt to follow through with these instructions at home. Whether this bears significant lore relevance or is simply there to be for spook factor isn't known. The second image is the caretaker that appeared before Room 66's house in a previous section, peeking out through the window. The third of these is a man, the man being none other than Herbert Lankman, and the fifth image is one depicting the face of the smiling Snatcher. The lights dim until all that is left is the familiar, sinister glow of Lankman's massive red eyes. Alex explains to us that after this encounter, Lankman simply let him go. Alex hadn't been punished or sold out to anyone. No one else was even aware of the events that had occurred that night. It was as if nothing had ever taken place. He goes on to explain that the reason this tape is being recorded is because it may be the last time that anyone will ever see him. He explains that he's doing extensive research on someone incredibly dangerous. People have been starting to follow Alex lately, and the caretakers and Lankman have been more aggressive than ever before. He feels as if after he tells these people the information on the person he's researching, he will no longer be useful, no longer be needed. He will be discarded. Alex tells us that after this recording, he's going to meet with this person. We don't know who this dangerous person is. While he is talking, we can see that the door has opened behind Alex. However, he doesn't make any note of it. He sighs, leaning over to catch his breath, and when he does this, we see that the door is open, revealing a dark hallway. I adore this shot. Alex soon resurfaces and turns off the recording. Roll credits. After the credits are finished, an image of Winfrey is depicted above the "to be continued" text. If you remember, last volume ended off with an image of Lankman. It's safe to assume that the next volume will predominantly feature Winfrey. There is one last thing to look at in regards to Volume 1, however, the description. Similar to the installments before it, Volume 1 has contents within the description that explain more of the story utilizing the second-person writing format. This description seems to be taking place after Volume 1, as insinuated by the first sentence. The passage reads as follows. After watching the collection of tapes, you knew what you had to do. Late that night, you left your home, hitching a ride with a taxi and making your way towards that place you saw in the tapes. You didn't know what to expect when you arrived there. For all you knew, it may not even be around anymore. The thought of what you might see there terrified you, but filled with a new purpose, you marched towards it regardless. Your driver dropped you off far from your destination, not wanting anything to do with where you told him you were going, and so you walked. For hours you walked along a pathway of dirt and gravel, passing through a part of the county that felt like a ghost town. It had been so long since you stepped foot here, yet everything felt so familiar. The moon loomed high overhead when you finally arrived at your destination, the Lankman's asylum. The place was now boarded up and abandoned, a husk of its former self. You stood there in front of the entrance to it for what felt like an eternity. You knew what you had to do there, but you didn't have the strength to do it. Eventually the dread became too much to bear, so you turned around and got ready to walk all the way back. But then you heard something. A bellowing, calling to you from deeper within the forest. You recognized the creature's call, and moved beyond the asylum as you ventured into the forest to meet someone you never thought you'd see again. It seems this Tommy character has more to them than we may have previously thought. The relation to all of these events, as well to who this familiar creature lurking within the forest is anyone's guess, and another mystery for another day. And there we have it. Every single installment currently available of Dreams of an Insomniac. My love for this series goes beyond words. No descriptor in the English vocabulary could describe how well executed and impactful I found this series to be, but it would be a crime not to try. So what exactly makes Dreams of an Insomniac so effective and unique? What did I like, and even what did I not like about it? I'd like to thoroughly explore what I think are the best aspects of DOAI, and what make it the way it is. The environments and art design, the characters and character design, the soundtrack, and the story. I'll also include a section documenting any critiques I have with the series. That out of the way, this is how Dreams of an Insomniac scares us. universe of Eastridge County is expansive and very well put together. Every single character and even many scenes and environments are directly impacted and inspired by old iconic horror movies. A fact that pleases me and any other horror enjoyer greatly, I'm sure. I'm not going to ruin the magic for you and list every single one of these references, mainly because I want you to go explore for yourself. Pay attention to character names and events and phrases, and see if you notice anything. The other reason I won't tell you is because I'm sure I have yet to find every single one of these references, so I'd love to hear from your findings. Gignac is very clearly inspired by these horror elements, and it adds an extra layer of charm to the horrifying world of Eastridge. These environments remind me primarily of towns such as Derry from It and Hawkins from Stranger Things. I never finished Stranger Things, but I'm including it to establish my point. The charm of a small, rustic 80s town being haunted by supernatural, unexplainable occurrences and creatures is a trope that I adore. When watching and reading through Stephen King's It, I never felt unsettled by the monsters or the scares or the blood, but what really got to me was the environment. As I stated before, this is such a desolate, tightly knit town. Eastridge County before all of this was said to be almost entirely barren and uneventful. It brings up the question, what's so special about Eastridge that the Veldigan are appearing here? And are there any other areas of the world being haunted by this species that we are completely unaware of? While the town of Eastridge is horrifying in its own right, the area I want to primarily focus on is actually the Lankman Asylum. We only get around 2 good shots of this place, one of a doorway in a patient's room, and the shot of the hallway leading down to room 66. However, these shots as well as the storytelling describing the environment are more than enough to make this my favorite location in the series. In order to go into depth about the effectiveness of this particular environment, I'm going to have to touch on a few subjects that may be distressing to some viewers. If any of these topics are too triggering or uncomfortable, please skip to the timestamp labeled below. You are not alone. Mental asylums and psychiatric wards are very frequently utilized in any media relating to horror. Hospitals in general are a very common fear, and it's impossible to deny how eerie an abandoned hospital or psych ward is. Equipment left to rot, dust covering every corner, yellow walls peeling back to reveal the bones of the building. These environments are creepy, especially when you take into account that this was once a place of care and rehabilitation. However, the horror of these establishments sometimes aren't caused because of how they are after being active, but instead during. Especially in older times when mental health was not studied as regularly as it is today, these facilities were anything but equipped to deal with the suffering person. A lot of facilities would instead turn to disciplinary measures and strict, threatening approaches. When in a psychiatric ward, unless you end up in a unique outlier, you are constantly being surveyed for your own safety. This is understandable, of course, as it's important to make sure that someone is okay at all times when they are mentally unwell. This doesn't make it any less horrifying, however, to be wide awake in the middle of the night and having to hear the door open every 5 minutes, seeing a sliver of light creep into your room and swiftly disappear the moment that your caretaker confirms you're still breathing. That, accompanied with the fact that the media frequently portrays psychiatric units as places where messed up, twisted people go to find their next murder victims and scream all day long, makes for the mental hospital to be a very common trope in mainstream horror media. But I especially love the way that DOAI presents the Lankman's Asylum. It's a unique take on an otherwise overused and often misinterpreted trope. The patients at the asylum aren't just here because of a genetic disorder or an uncontrollable mental illness. They are here because they were essentially given these mental instabilities by the Veldigan. The traumatic events are more than enough to warrant insanity, but that combined with the fact that these people are physically and mentally deteriorating each day is horrifying. Having an entire building completely full of people who are all quite literally painfully altering into something they can't understand is a terrifying concept. It was absolutely commonplace for screams and creaking cries to constantly wail throughout the facility, only for those sounds to trigger traumatic events and cause even more people to start screaming in anguish. The Lankman Foundation remains mysterious and remains in power primarily because of 2 very effective factors: surveillance and control. Every patient is heavily monitored. There are hidden cameras all around, unknown to the employees. In a real-life psych ward, while there aren't cameras hidden by mysterious goggles that conceal certain objects, there is still a heavy reliance on surveillance. As I mentioned before, nurses are typically instructed to check up on you while you sleep to make sure you're even still alive. When getting admitted, usually the nurses are instructed to thoroughly inspect you for any wounds or major injuries. When using the bathroom, the door will be knocked on every few minutes, along with the shower. Every meal you eat is documented. All of your behavior is written down, sometimes not even related to treatment at all. This is one of the most intimidating aspects of a psychiatric unit, in the media at least, and it makes sense that Gignac would choose to heavily rely on this theme in the setting. Another common theme of the Lankman Asylum is, of course, control, and control by fear. The employees are all under control, the patients are all under control, the monsters being experimented are under control to some degree. You are under their control. Everything down to the outfits that the employees are instructed to wear, to the fact that every single procedure and every single task has strict instructions that must be followed. This control over the people is obviously put in place to obscure information from any unwanted individuals, as well as the public. The unwanted, hidden information is referring to Winfrey, the captured Veldigan that has been residing in the facility. However, there are likely still so many other secrets hidden from Eastridge County and hidden from us within this facility. The coloring of these environments also helps to solidify these themes and effectively manages to create a noticeable fear factor. The red tint of the asylum adds not only an eye-catching color that is pleasing to view, but also an overlying sinister tone, one that is directly contrasted by the serene greens featured in Alex's room, excluding the moment he describes discovering room 66.
Magical.
Equipment and wheelchairs are also strung about from what we see in this hallway, and there is also an abundance of televisions, like more TVs than any asylum needs. These may have been used for many things, such as broadcasts, but there isn't much direct confirmation. The rooms given to patients, I assume, all look the same, and from the one we actually get to see, we can gather that, well, there's nothing. Each and every room is bleak, empty, and soulless. Patients are left with nothing but their thoughts, misery, and trauma. The hallway walls are also entirely barren, and each door seems to be equipped with some form of glowing red light. The lights above are flickering madly, implying that the power in this place may not be of top quality. And when we get to actually see room 66, its walls are also completely barren aside from massive bloodstains and fluorescent lighting. The environment of the Lankman Asylum, to me, proves how much effort and heart went into the production of DOAI. So many tiny details have to have been heavily researched, showing Gignac's dedication to the authenticity and believability of this world, which is what makes the environmental storytelling so effective. Not to mention the creative liberties and artistic design put into the environments and world. For instance, there is a prominent reliance on brightly colored lighting. Eastridge is tinted a rustic orange, which makes sense considering orange is a color associated with Halloween, and also heavily associated with Gignac and their channel. The Eastridge County Police Department tapes and posters also feature a heavy emphasis on the color orange. When being chased by Clyde, everything is tinted in a bright yellow light. Alex's room is shrouded in green, while the Lankman Asylum and Lankman Foundation tapes are frequently associated with bright reds. Color coding certain characters, events, and locations is something that, as an amateur artist, I can appreciate a lot more than most people may. Not only does it create a distinction between different tones, themes, and emotions, but it also just looks damn gorgeous. Gignac himself is a very talented artist, especially when it comes to the usage of colors, so it only makes sense that the art of Dreams of an Insomniac is so stellar. The artwork used in the PSAs is also exceptional, as it definitely looks a lot like something you would actually see in a public service announcement. Also, like, Canadian PSAs are really funny, but also sometimes horrifying, so the whole PSA approach is really cool because, like, you would absolutely see the fucking smiling snatcher show up in a PSA and tell you not to smoke or he'll eat you. TLDR, Canada is scary. I like colors, and Lankman Asylum is my favorite environment in the series. Got it? Got it. It's no surprise that a big reason why the Pastra YouTube channel is so well loved is because of the cult following their characters have amassed. Gignac provides a lot of insight into each of their characters, and you can tell there is a lot of passion felt by the creator towards their creations. Dreams of an Insomniac features antagonists that are defined as their own species, being dubbed the Veldigan. A lot of information is out there on the Veldigan, some of which can't be explained without spoiling the possible future of DOAI. However, the basis of it is as follows. The Veldigan start out in a void state, and evolve into their physical characteristics based on what they consume. We don't know how many Veldigan exist in the world, but it's likely that these 6 known ones are the only ones. Only 2 of these have been shown in Dreams of an Insomniac, being Clyde, the Smiling Snatcher, predominantly featured in Volume 0, and Winfrey, the tallest of of the gang at around 13 feet tall. We know that at some point in time, Winfrey was captured by the Lankman Foundation. The other Veldigan are as follows: Jack, whose namesake likely comes from the Jack-in-the-Box torso this Veldigan dons. Klaus, the smallest Veldigan wearing the costume of a mouse. The Flock, who couldn't evolve from its void state, and consumed many birds and foul creatures, giving it its unique appearance. And lastly, Simon, who serves almost as the good guy of the group. This Veldigan attempts to stop the others from consuming people. All of this information isn't given to us directly within the contents of DOAI, so there is a slim chance that this information is no longer canon or has been altered in some way. Take all of that with a grain of salt. The most iconic one of these characters is without a doubt Clyde, the smiling snatcher and the primarily focus of Volume 0. Clyde is the main mascot of the Pastra YouTube channel, and is often used to represent Gignac themselves. A lot of comments I see about Clyde's usage in DOAI usually is about how people never could have imagined Clyde being scary in the slightest. However, I think this character design works perfectly in a horror aspect. A bright yellow face against pure black, all while sporting a big orange onesie with his horns and tail sticking out menacingly. Yes, when drawn in silly situations, and when we see this character on screen talking about funny critters movies, we aren't necessarily frightened by him. But the fundamental fact is that this character design works for horror. The crooked eyes and smile, all while admitting a yellow glow, is more than effective for reasons I've already explained to you. The other two character designs in the series so far that are noticeably effective are Winfrey and Lankman. I can say most of what I said about Clyde in reference to these two characters. Winfrey and Lankman in their more cartoonish forms may not be horrifying given the context, but the horror design principles are absolutely there. Even so, in Dreams of an Insomniac, the more cartoon aspects of the designs are stripped away, quite literally. Lankman's face peels off to reveal rotten, distorted teeth and decaying facial structure, while Winfrey's goofy face shape is transformed into a gory, melting mess, his sunken eyes still finding a way into his design while being less sleepy and charming and more skeletal. I also already spoke on Winfrey's body shape and language being important to his character design, as this character uses large shapes and evokes a sense of megalophobia due to his massive and wide size. And yet, despite the fact that he's so large and wide, you can still see his ribcage showing through his chest, and his bones showing through his waist. Yes, surprise surprise, larger shaped characters can have the scary ribcage effect too. Take note, character designers. While hard to see in the video, we can see that Winfrey also has enormous claws that bend backwards slightly while he's in this gorilla-like pose. These claws could undoubtedly impale a human being in mere seconds. Speaking of this pose, he's bent over, meaning that if Winfrey decided to stand up straight, he would be even larger than he is in the video. Lankman, meanwhile, utilizes design philosophies similar to a character like the Scarecrow, a character that actually means a big deal to Gignac, mentioned in multiple videos as well as an entire video dedicated solely to analyzing the character design and its evolution. So it's very clear that Gignac has lots of experience in studying character design. In The Many Mascots of Pastra, Gignac explains and goes over, well, the many mascots of Pastra. This video is probably the most concrete and definitive source of explanations regarding the designs of Gignac's characters, and gives good insight into the backstory of a lot of characters, both ones that have been featured in DOI already, and ones that aren't. I would recommend watching this video for yourself if you're interested in these character designs, the story and meaning behind them, as well as to see the evolution of the character designs from drawing to reality. The human characters are honestly the one thing I feel like could use polishing, as I don't necessarily feel attached to any of them except for maybe Alex. The antagonists featured in DOAI are a wonderful breath of fresh air in an oversaturated genre that primarily features antagonists that are usually just animatronics or some kind of distorted humanoid. I especially enjoy how even in their more threatening forms, the Veldigan that we've seen so far still keep their original color palettes. With Winfrey, it's obviously a lot harder to see in the red lighting, but Clyde's bright orange and yellow coloring still remains intact in his depictions. Something that I really appreciate, considering how colorless and desaturated a lot of analog horror tends to look. Dreams of an Insomniac has truly created its own unique feel and style, something that I feel really earns it a spot up there with the greats. The Mandela catalog is probably the most popular in its genre, yet it doesn't have any stylistic differences that make it super unique compared to other popular analog horrors on the platform. In fact, the only other popular analog horror franchises to utilize actual stylation include the Walton Files, a series that, while being stylistically unique and impressive, often sacrifices other elements of the production for the style. And the other franchise is Moving on. Overall, I think DOAI's characters and character design are another key element that helps to make it just as good as it is. They're unique, distinct, and get bonus points for being fun to draw. Dreams of an Insomniac has a completely original soundtrack created by Lyra Horrors, a horror artist who has her own analog horror short on her channel, and who is also one of the main contributors to the world of DOAI, being responsible for a plethora of concept artwork as well as modeling. She deserves all of the attention and more, so make sure to support her as well. Anyways, throughout this entire video, I've been continuously making it known to you guys just how impactful and masterfully crafted this soundtrack really is. The most calm from the most intense moments are always enhanced with a score that just doesn't quit. The music has repeatedly managed to unsettle, relax, and charm me. I've had a lot of these tracks playing in the background of this video, as well as just in the background while I'm writing this script, because of how good they are. The musical score is truly given a chance to shine in Volume 1. However, the highlights of Volume 0 are still just as incredible. Haunted Halloween PSA doesn't actually have any music playing in the background until the first contact with Clyde. The security footage shifts through different pictures until it displays a close-up of the smiling snatcher himself. When this image appears, we get our first glimpse at the soundtrack. Have a listen. This soundtrack, titled The East Ridge Demon, starts off strangely tranquil, akin to an old broken record, skimming through several notes. It's the perfect example of something serene and beautiful, sounding horrifying and eerie all the same. Peaceful notes playing while breathing and wheezing can faintly be heard in the background. It sounds exactly like an old song that was unintentionally really creepy. It also helps that the scene that this track is playing in is accompanied by this wonderful Clyde model. This section of the song especially reminds me of the style of artists such as The Caretaker. If that name doesn't immediately ring a bell, they're behind tracks such as Libet's Delay and the album Everywhere at the End of Time. You know, the This kind of music is used a lot in analog horror, but the difference here is rather than being directly ripped from The Caretaker or similar artists, it's entirely original, all while sounding just as chilling and beautiful as the tracks that other franchises tend to utilize. Also, like, The Caretaker is one of my favorite musicians, so Lyra, if you're watching this, that's a pretty big compliment coming from me. The next segment of the song is the track that we see playing in the police training tape when the list of symptoms are being read off. I love this track. The blaring, droning notes loudly repeating, all while desperate wheezes and aching groans start kicking in. It's what makes the original scene so effective and bone-chilling compared to the rest of the volume. A lot of other analog horror would likely not put in any music in the background of a scene such as this, and if they did, it would probably just be remixed in distorted, spooky 70s music. This transitions into 4 simple notes. Simple, but chillingly effective. Being used for the scene towards the end featuring the smiling snatcher, these 4 notes repeat throughout the rest of the track, and is definitely the most recognizable soundtrack that this volume has to offer. There are multiple iterations of this particular track. The last soundtrack I want to touch up on this volume is The Rules of the Season. This is the more upbeat, vintage track that plays during the PSA of the same name. This track in particular stands out to me as not only is it the only song in the volume that isn't necessarily a horror track, but it also feels incredibly real and believable. This sounds so akin to an actual royalty-free elevator music type PSA song, and it also doesn't help that it's just really, really catchy. Go ahead and have a listen. You've probably noticed me playing this track in particular a few times throughout this video, and I will likely continue to use it a lot in future videos, because it is just that much of a banger. As for Volume 1, the soundtrack only continues to get even better from here. The first song that we hear is Alex's theme, titled A Voice That Goes Unheard. This theme is much more serene, and it kind of reminds me of the kind of track that would play in the credits of an older horror movie. While not being necessarily scary, this track works well to build a mysterious, almost title screen sounding song. This section in particular reminds me a lot of the Plants vs. Zombies soundtrack, to a point where if you just told me it was from the original game, I wouldn't need to do a double take. And as one of the biggest PvZ fans out there, that is a high honor. The next original track is the one that plays during the call to the East Ridge Police, being titled Give Us a Call. This track is primarily an ambient one. Droning sounds play in the background while odd distorted noises sound, until a disturbing melody sounds in the distance, being cut off by loud static. When the static plays in the volume, groaning noises sounding from the caretakers can be heard before the track promptly cuts off. This next track is one that I have more to talk about, however, this being Human Factory, the song that plays during the Lankman Foundation training tape. A prominent theme throughout Volume 1 is the stark contrast between Alex and the Foundation. This is primarily shown through the usage of color, as I explained previously, but also through the audio. Alex's theme is much more low-key and relaxed, while this track, being used to represent the Lankman Foundation, is abundantly industrial. From the first few seconds, this is made apparent, the track sounding chaotic and factorial. I imagine this is what the unpaid LankyBox employees listen to when editing in the basement for hours on end. This track is primarily made up of these 6 notes played in a deep synthesizer bass, reoccurring throughout the track. Later on, when these notes appear again, they're accompanied by even more notes playing alongside them in the background, making this tune sound exceedingly threatening. I can't express how good this song is. Genuinely, I am so upset that this shit isn't on Spotify, because you know damn well I would be pumping this OST every single day. Thank God for YouTube Music. If you're very knowledgeable when it comes to the Pastra YouTube channel, for some reason, this song may sound a tad bit familiar. This is because the leitmotif has been used before, specifically in a marketing campaign for the Clyde Makeship plush, as well as its glow-in-the-dark zombie counterpart. In this advertisement, we're introduced to a silly character known as Swaggart Salesworth, or Swankman, a character made for advertisement purposes. This character has a theme song, one that I have played in the background of this very video, and if you have a listen, you'll notice something familiar. Yes, that's right, Human Factory, the theme of the Lankman Foundation, shares a leitmotif with that of the Swankman theme. And might I just say, this song composed by Lyra goes a little too hard for what is essentially a shitpost made to advertise a plush. This shows just how much time and effort went into making this volume, as Lankman has technically had this theme for, 9 months at this point? It's also worth noting that Swankman shares the same actor as Lankman in DOAI, Bravi. So yeah, things have been in the works for quite some time. Next up, we have a track titled Specimen 02. This is the theme that plays when Winfrey makes his first ever appearance. Before even getting into the beauty that is this track, there's something that is immediately a point of interest, the title. This implies that Winfrey is Specimen 02, but wouldn't that mean there exists a Specimen 01? That's certainly interesting. Let me know who you think this specimen is in the comments. This track begins with a few blaring drones, making for a very unsettling ambient track. The beat starts to slowly fade in until we're left with this. More notes start to kick in, and the tension in this track starts to set into the viewer, especially considering that this plays when Alex is pointing his camera down a horrifying red corridor, slowly getting closer and closer towards the end where this monster awaits him, all while the music slowly increases its tension. The track starts to progressively speed up, more and more notes and drones blaring in the background, time seeming to speed up, until... In a horrifyingly chilling moment, as Winfrey is revealed to us, we hear a blaring, repeating, frantic sound, while screams of pain sound from every corner, while Winfrey's croaking breathing echoes throughout the room, mimicking the voice of patient 66 begging for help. The audio and music in this scene is what truly makes it magnificent, only for it to immediately cut into our next track, the voice that silences. It begins quietly, however, like the other tracks, it slowly starts to pick up, before the beat drops. even more distorted version of the past two Lankman tracks, while the leitmotif featured in Volume 0 during Clyde's terrifying segment plays in the background. The track slowly gets more intense before coming to an end. The music and the accompanying album art is simply beautiful. I wish I had the words to describe how lovely these tracks are, how outstandingly impressive and professional they sound. The audio design as well is nothing short of phenomenal. Hell, while editing this video, there are multiple sounds I hadn't picked up on upon my first viewing. For example, during the Foundation training tape, you can hear a faint voice whispering in your ear.
And safely. The first of these precautions should have been provided to you on your first day at the job.
Something that genuinely scared me when going back and editing. Thanks, Zach. Anyways, if you haven't already, go check out Lyra Horrors, the composer of the DOI OST, and also maybe check out her own analog horror short while you're at it. She's incredibly talented, underrated, and deserves your attention. The story of Dreams of an Insomniac is one that I, well, literally just spent the majority of this video talking about. The general concept is simple and easy to grasp, but what makes the story so wonderful is all of the details coming together. For instance, because of context clues and information given to us throughout the story, we can infer that Officer Kruger was taken in for experimentation or other uses by the Lankman Foundation in 1987, and from this moment, Kruger was publicly pronounced dead. Because the Lankman Foundation is stated to have also funded the police, we can infer that it's likely the police were willing to cooperate with them, as they are known to be allies. This context clue is also very disturbing when you take into account that this is likely the reason for the police operator hanging up as soon as patient 66 described the people who were at her door. Because the police and the Lankman Asylum and Foundation are in cahoots, it's likely that a lot of people have suffered at the hands of the Foundation because the police, well, weren't willing to help. We can also infer that the main person behind these experiments and researches is Lankman himself, as he is quite literally the face of the Foundation. We also know that Lankman and the Doctor are the same character, as they're both depicted with the same voice and glowing red eyes. Information is constantly fed to us in a way that feels natural, but is also not hard enough to decipher that the story can still be enjoyed without needing to search endlessly. I also really enjoy the premise of the viewer being the character of Tommy. Tommy is someone we don't know much about, and it is likely that we will discover more about him in the future installments. The story so far is coherent and compelling, however there are still a multitude of unanswered questions. For one, what experiments exactly were being conducted in the Lankman Asylum? There has to be an overlying narrative plot point here, especially relating to patient 66, the woman who was mysteriously dragged into the room where Winfrey was being held. Why exactly was this seemingly regular patient dragged into this room? It wouldn't make much sense for the intention to have been to have her killed or sacrificed to Winfrey, considering she's, well, alive. Perhaps it was possible that the Foundation had kidnapped an unaffected person and placed them in a room with one of the Veldigan to see how it would affect them. They may have been experimenting to specifically find a way to lessen the side effects that a person experiences when in contact with the Veldigan, and used an unaffected person in order to see if these effects have successfully been neutralized. It's also important to note that there are dead bodies in the room that Winfrey is being kept in, and based on the bloody handprint on his face as well as the gory status of his mouth and teeth, we can safely assume that Winfrey has been snacking. So, was the Foundation sacrificing people or its patients to the Veldigan in the hopes of neutralizing it? Or was Winfrey actively consuming the staff in which his care was placed? Both of these are very plausible and very disturbing. There is also the plotline of one Mortimer Gray, a character that is yet to be actually presented to us within the contents of DOAI. As I've mentioned before, the only glimpses we've gotten of this character are drawings created by Gignac outside of DOAI. This leads us to assume that Mortimer Gray was corrupted into this devilish appearance by Clyde, and it is only a matter of time before his story is told. Although all of these elements blend together perfectly, there are still a few criticisms that I have. Well, kind of. Notice how this is the shortest part of the video? I've genuinely been sitting here for 5 minutes trying to find anything that can be remotely considered as a criticism. There's so much I adore about this series that it can be actually really difficult to pinpoint things I think need improving. I suppose there is 2 things I can think of right off the bat. The first being a lack of an endearing human cast. The characters in this series are one of my favorite things, as I've stated previously, specifically the antagonists, but I honestly don't really care for the protagonists themselves very much. Obviously, I understand the limitations of this medium, and how it's hard to fit in good characters when each volume is typically short in length, but I really wish that I gave a damn about any of these guys except maybe Alex. Alex is the closest thing we have to a main character as of now, as even Tommy is shrouded in mystery. He's my favorite favorite of the human cast, probably just because he's kind of the only one, other than Kruger, I guess. This may be a hot take, but my favorite part of the Mandela catalog isn't the spooky monsters or the story. It's the main cast. Specifically, Jonah and Adam. The reason why I like these two characters in particular so much is because of the interactions that they share. I feel more attachment to them when we see them go back and forth, and as such, I feel a lot more distressed to see something bad happen to them. I really hope DOAI has characters like this later down the line if it isn't already planned. However, the rest of the cast, specifically the antagonists, are so phenomenal that it's not something that bothers me too much. My second criticism, if you can even call it that, is more of an overall want from myself personally. I really wish we got to see more of the artwork and models that were actually created for the series. For instance, Clyde has a model, but we don't really get to ever see it. But that really is all I can say in regards to criticism. Of course, the comments are open to discussion if there's anything that you guys think the series could do to improve itself. So, this series clearly has a lot of different traits that mold it into what it is. Out of all of these aspects, though, there is one trait about Dreams of an Insomniac that is hands down the most noticeable, most important, and most impressive part of the entire production: the passion. Every single scene is ripe with pure, unfiltered passion that is felt immensely. The amount of effort that had to go into just Volume 1 alone was so much that it took an entire year to complete. You can hear the enthusiasm in Pastra's voice as they recall the horrors of the asylum as the character of Alex Williams. You can hear the emotion and talent within the beautiful and frightening soundtrack composed by Lyra Horrors. You can notice the fear prevalent in Spidey's voice acting when being on the phone with the dispatcher. Feel the intimidation in Bravy's voice when she's portraying Lankman. See the horrific detail of artwork from people such as Draxum or Watchful Eye. This project is such an impressive feat, one that I could never do proper service to with my own mere words, which is why I'm honored to invite Pastra. Sorry I keep referring to you with your last name and also purposefully pronouncing it wrong. I found it amusing. To the stage today. They have agreed to come on and explain their process and inspiration for Dreams of an Insomniac. I won't yap any longer. Here is our dear friend Pastra Speck, creator of Dreams of an Insomniac.
Whoa, hello, it's me, the funny horror guy who got spooked by Bendy and the Ink Machine and made the thingy we're talking about. Hi! Okay. All jokes aside, I absolutely love being given the opportunity to take a moment just to talk about DOAI, because this series so far has been the biggest labor of love I have ever had the pleasure of working on. What started in 2017 as some goofy little side project I made to give my original characters a world to inhabit quickly spiraled into becoming my personal love letter to the horror genre. When I began working on DOAI, it was never with the intention of creating the next big series that everyone talks about, or it being considered the best of the genre. Instead, I set out to put everything I love about horror into practice, creating a series that essentially embodies all of my favorite aspects of it. Volume 0 was my way of testing the waters, seeing what I could do when trying to follow a more generic analog horror structure, and then experimenting with the series as more entries followed. I guess you could think of it as a pilot episode of sorts, with the newest entry, Volume 1, being the proper beginning to the series. With this entry, I started to follow a process that I intend to for the rest of the series, taking small story beats and scene concepts from different works of horror I love, and experimenting with ways I can reinvent them for my own series. With Volume 1, it was this strange mix of me wanting to create a campier, almost comic book-esque villain out of Lankman and the Asylum, as well as the story structure following something similar to that of an old creepypasta. It was a combination that I was worried wouldn't work, but actually seeing the finished product, I genuinely don't think I could be happier with it. This video was a labor of love that was well worth the full year it took to produce, and it makes me so incredibly excited for what will come of the rest of the series. What I am working on is a dream come true for me. It is everything I could want from a horror series. My own ideal vision brought to life, all thanks to the support of my community and my talented friends who have helped me make it. And for that, I am so immensely grateful. Anyways though, that'll be all from me for now. I'd better head back before Lankman throws a tantrum over missing his nap time. Goodbye for now.
A huge thank you to Pastra for coming on to talk about their creative vision. This story has impacted me in so many ways despite only being around for slightly over a year, and also despite me actually taking a while to sit down and watch it for myself. I know that the only way to popularize an analog horror series is to make an hour-long over-analysis on its contents and spoon-feed explanations to the audience. So I pray to the analog gods that this reaches its target audience and finds the people that it needs to. This series has turned me into a genuine analog horror fan when I could hardly be bothered with the genre beforehand, and I truly believe that this should set a new standard and precedent for similar works of art. I hope to see the works of people like Pastra and Lyra inspire a multitude of fantastic media in the future. If there's one thing I'd like you to take away from this video, it's this. Watch Dreams of an Insomniac. And to Zach and everyone involved in this project, thank you. Your dreams coming to life has inspired so many people, more than you may think. Your continued effort and creativity has made me and others feel practically every emotion in the book. I wish you the best going forward. You should be so proud of what you've accomplished. Thank you for your time. I've been quinnamon, and don't forget to stay safe, stay smiling, and above all, stay spooky.